Well, this is basically a very informal, biographical kind of interview.
Sure.
Now let's just start at the beginning. I've read and I've heard, and you've said as much, that you were attracted to libraries from a very early age.
Right.
What was the appeal? What was the attraction?
Well, I come from a family that has always been library users and always been a family of readers. And so we were introduced to libraries, as many people are, at a very young age as children. And when I was about 14 years old, my mother, one, I think, summer, said, I have a job, I've arranged for a job for you so that you can start earning some money to pay for college. And I thought, well, I'm only 14 years old, how is that going to happen? And she said, well, I got you a job at the library. And I was hired as a page at the Hillside Public Library for 75 cents an hour.
What was the experience? Yeah.
There are just a couple of hairs near the back that are popping up a little bit.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
That may be throughout the whole thing. I mean, that's sort of my hair.
Okay.
Well, okay.
Turn around so you can see it. It's just right at the back.
Yeah, those are gonna stick up no matter what you do.
Okay.
Okay. Well, we always
So,
want to make sure that,
yeah.
that you're comfortable with it.
Thank you.
Okay.
I long ago got over the hair thing.
Okay.
Squirrel.
Okay.
Okay.
So what was the experience like? What did you get to do, and what did you learn from it?
Well, you know, it was great for a book lover and a reader. It was fantastic because there I was working in the very environment that I loved to be in, because I was always a reader, as was really everybody in our family. But what was great for me was it was my first formal job, you know, where I got a paycheck and money was deducted for Social Security and things like that. And I learned to work with different kinds of people. I learned to work with the public. I learned really to understand how vital a public library is, no matter how small it could be, it is, how vital it is for people's lives. It does everything from entertain young people to really provide people with essential information they need for their home, their business, their health. And I really learned that at an early age. It also taught me how to work with different people and how to respond to different management styles, and gave me some opportunity to put a mental checklist together of, if when I grow up and if I'm ever in a position to manage people, how I would do it.
Yeah, our library in my little hometown of Metropolis I was kind of a latchkey kid, and so between school and when the parents got home, that's where I was.
Right.
You could thrive there. How long did you do that? How long were you there?
I probably stayed at the public library for 4 or 5 years, and then I took a job at Bonwit Teller as a cashier wrapper at Bonwit Teller. But I would often come back to the library on vacations, even when I was away at college. And it was really when I was in college and came back to visit my colleagues at the library that they encouraged me to go on and get a master's degree in library science after I graduated from college.
And where did you do that?
University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana.
What was, this would have been at a time when libraries were starting to make a transition into the digital age. Not quite there yet, but there were some
Right.
things changing.
They were not really there, but in 1975 and 1976, if you wanted to learn what the future of libraries was going to be, certainly the University of Illinois was the place to be, because that was one of the real founding universities for technology. And so I actually, believe it or not, in 1975 took a class at the Graduate School of Library and Information Science in library automation, where we learned about, you know, that was back when computers were these huge room-size computers, the UNIVAC situation, and we learned about bits and bytes and how that could eventually, how it would apply to libraries and library operations.
Did you work professionally in libraries after that point? I know you went on to get a Juris Doctor in law.
I did. When I graduated from the University of Illinois, I was fortunate enough to be a recipient of an Illinois State Library Scholarship. And then which is how I paid for library school, and then I took a job back in my hometown of Hillside. They were looking for their very first professional MLS degreed librarian, and they hired me. And so I stayed in that job for 2 years, running the public library in Hillside, Illinois, which by that point had built and moved into its own building.
What was that experience like, actually being in charge?
It was great fun. You know, it was really, really wonderfully fun because, you know, I was fresh out of library school. I had all the enthusiasm and knew the town intimately, which was important, knew the schools, knew the principals, and kind of understood what I wished the library had been for me when I was growing up and what I wanted to have it be for others in terms of collections and programs and just how the library could really portray itself to the people in the village and be useful as a resource.
Why did you go pursue a law degree?
Well, after 2 years in public librarianship on very little salary, I started looking for a job for a librarian that would have paid a little bit more. And at that point, the Kirkland & Ellis law firm was hiring librarians to come and work in organizing information, which was a brilliant move on their part. So they hired me and several other librarians to be legal assistants. And part of my responsibility was working in those big antitrust cases in the 70s, where there were literally rooms and rooms of documents, and it was our job to organize them, scan them, catalog them, and make them retrievable for the lawyers who were working on those big cases. And after several years, well, I think about 3 years of doing that, one of the senior partners actually said to me, you know, you're as smart as everybody else here, why don't you go to law school? And it had never occurred to me to really go to law school or think about it, but I thought about it. I took the LSAT in the middle of a document production. I excused myself from a document production to go take the LSAT and then came back to do the document production, and then applied to Loyola and DePaul and chose to go to DePaul, was accepted at both and chose to go to DePaul University.
How did the appointment as commissioner evolve?
Well, I was practicing law at the Sidley and Austin law firm, and one of my colleagues, literally the office next door to me, was Gary Chico, who had worked for the city, worked for the mayor, and was at that point going back to, at the mayor's invitation, become a deputy chief of staff to the mayor, to Mayor Daley. And Gary was in his new, renewed position for probably 6 months, and called me one day out of the blue and said, why wouldn't you consider becoming commissioner of the Chicago Public Library? Because he knew I was a librarian. And I just started laughing and I said, well, has anyone ever asked me to be commissioner of the Chicago Public Library? And he said, well, I'm asking you, would you come in and talk to us about taking over the role of commissioner, because the position was vacant? And I laughed and said no, and you know, maintained our friendship, but said no. And Gary was a very smart man. He called back. He would wait 6 weeks or so, and then he'd call me back again and ask the same question. And I said no each time, because I was very happy practicing law and doing what I was doing. And finally, after the fourth time,
Let's wait for the phone. Just a second.
Leland, that's a private line. So, you know, can you just hit call forward on my phone? Because then it'll forward to her. Yeah, but it'll keep ringing in here unless we hit call forward. Just hit the. You see, it's like the third button down on the right.
But it's on the top.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's great.
As you were saying,
So Gary kept calling me about every 6 weeks, and I kept saying no. And just saying, look, I'm happy practicing law. I'm happy, you know, just being a private citizen. And about the fourth time is when my husband said, what does it hurt? Go talk to the man. Go talk to the mayor. Number one, you are qualified to do the job because you have a master's in library science. Number two, you would do a good job. And number three, think of all the good you could do for the children of Chicago, which to an Irish Catholic is the worst thing you can possibly say, and he knew he could get away with saying that. And I had actually only met the mayor once before that. I did not know the mayor, and I went in to see him, and he started talking at length about his vision for the public library to become a source of lifelong learning, a community center in every neighborhood of our city, He wanted the libraries to be stronger and respected and better equipped and more enriched in its collections and more forward thinking. And I walked out of his office, called my husband from the payphone in City Hall, and he said, well, so how did the meeting go? And I said, I think he thinks I already work there. And that meeting was in November, and I started in January of 1994.
Now, the list that he gave you is daunting on so many levels. How did you go about starting to take the reins of this organization?
Well, you know, the first thing that I always ask whenever I go into any situation is, what's the mission of this organization? And no one could articulate a strong mission for the organization. And the mayor had, 6 months before I came in, he had brought in a very strong financial team to go through the finances of the library and to get their financial house really in order. But we looked around, all of us, and said, what is the mission of this organization? Let's determine what that is. And then, at the time, I think our operating budget was about $65 million. It's now more than $100 million. But, you know, I said, well, we need to look at this as what's the business of this institution and what's the business plan for this institution? Because when you have that much taxpayer dollars and you're serving the public and you have this many outlets and this many locations, you have to have a business plan. And so the first thing we all did together was to develop a strategic plan for the library, probably the first in its history, or the first in about 100 years of its history.
What were the highlights of that plan?
The highlights of the plan were to look at, we asked our staff to look at our strengths and our weaknesses, and then we went after the weaknesses. The strengths were, we have a great dedicated staff and they really care about the library. The weaknesses were, we had very inadequate physical facilities. We did not have any technology to speak of, really. We had very uneven collections, and we had a very uneven budget. It kind of rose and fell with the fortunes of what was the popular funding need of the year in terms of the city budget process. And lastly, we had a staff that felt like, as much as they cared passionately about the role of the library, they knew that the technology world was passing them by because we really had not invested. The library had not invested in them in their professional development and training or in technology. So those were the 5 tenets of the strategic plan, and we gave ourselves 5 years to chip away at each of those, and we achieved every single one of our goals. The next thing I did, though, was to go back to the mayor and the budget office and say, this is our plan, here's where we are today, here's where we want to be in 5 years, and we need financial assistance to do that. And I must say, Mayor Daley stepped up immediately and said, we're going to have a separate portion of the real estate tax levy on the property tax bill for the libraries. He passed a GO bond issue for us to build new libraries. He gave us the wherewithal to put technology in our libraries, as did our Library Foundation. I mean, our first big grant for technology came from Bill Gates. And from there we were kind of off to the races.
Over your tenure, 41 new branch libraries have been
Right.
built, 9 green libraries, and there are new facilities still under construction.
We have 6 facilities under construction right now. 2 will open this year, and 4 will open next year.
How many branch libraries in total are there?
Well, right now we're at about 75, because what we have systematically done is we've closed down very small storefront libraries, and sometimes we'll combine 2 into 1. But of the 6 that are under construction now, 2 of them are being built in neighborhoods where we have never before had libraries, and that would be West Humboldt Park and Greater Grand Crossing. So we're very excited to bring those new branches to those neighborhoods, as well as in the Westtown neighborhood we're combining 2 small storefronts into 1 larger library, and then in the other neighborhoods it's a 1-for-1 replacement.
In following what the mayor's been doing in his tenure here in office, this really is another key to the city's renaissance in a lot of ways.
You know, it is. He has spoken at length about the role of the public sector in helping rejuvenate neighborhoods through construction projects, candidly. Whenever we build a new library, we're looking for a neighborhood that needs a library service. We're looking for land that is available to us at a reasonable price. But wherever possible, we're also looking to see if We can acquire something that might be a blight in the neighborhood, whether it's a liquor store or a motel that has gone kind of seedy, or some dilapidated or abandoned buildings, wipe those out, put up a brand new $8 or $10 million library, and you transform just the character of that neighborhood overnight, because what has been a problem spot becomes an enormous resource for people.
And that people want to do good things around it.
Right.
It brings up the property values.
There's absolutely no question. We have seen that in neighborhood after neighborhood. When the city has invested this kind of money in a library, it makes people realize this is enhancing their homes and their businesses, and they've done the same.
Talk about bridging the digital divide.
Mm-hmm.
I know part of my time is spent down in Springfield, and I meet with folks like Representative Howard, and this is a huge thing that
Right.
we need to be moving on. How is the Chicago Public Library system meeting that need?
Every location of the Chicago Public Library is equipped with state-of-the-art public access computers. We have about 3,000 computers in our system, plus free Wi-Fi. And there is absolutely no question, it's been studied, and the studies continue to show that there remains in this country a vast digital divide. And it exists along lines of race and class. And the only place where it is consistently bridged is at public libraries. And so at the Chicago Public Library, what this means is that to use a computer at the Chicago Public Library, all you need is a library card. You sign in on our reservation system by swiping your library card. It reserves a computer for you. You get 2 one-hour sessions per day with us. And last year, in 2009, the Chicago Public Library provided 3.8 million free one-hour internet sessions to the people of Chicago. And that's capacity. Every single library, every single hour of every single day, people are on computers. And what are they doing? 60% of them are using those computers to find information about finding a job, how to develop their resume, how to search for a job, how to apply for a job. How do we know that? Because we have librarians and cyber navigators who work in our libraries and do nothing but work one-on-one with the public to introduce them in how to use technology in a useful and meaningful way. So some people say, well, if you have the internet, you don't need a library. You absolutely do need a library. First of all, number one, so much good information is on our online databases, which are on our website. Secondly, there's a lot of useful information and a lot of junk on the internet, and you need librarians to help you divine between the two. And third, while many of us feel like we're very comfortable using technology, there's an awful lot of people out there who are not. And the easiest way for them to learn how to use technology is to come to the public library and for free have a knowledgeable person sit down and show them how to use it so that they can do the research they need to get the medical treatment they need, to find the job they need, to find the home or the education they need, or simply to be entertained. But first you have to have someone show you how and guide you along the way.
It'd be especially valuable for seniors.
Seniors love it, and they love the cyber navigators, because the cyber navigators are all these college and post-college kids who are very hip, very smart, and very, very patient with the seniors, and the seniors love going to them.
We'll talk about some programs, One Book, One Chicago program, to get people on the same page, literally.
Right. We started One Book, One Chicago in 2001, and our first selection was To Kill a Mockingbird, which, interestingly enough, celebrates its 50th year of publication this year. And this was a program that we borrowed from the city of Seattle. Seattle had started this as a very small, intimate, little salon-type program to try to get a large group of people reading the same book at the same time. But they kept it very, very, low-key. And we thought, well, we do book discussion groups here at Chicago Public Library. We do them in about 40 of our libraries in multiple languages. This will just be one more of those kinds of discussions. Let's try it. And it was a combination of the selection of a great book, To Kill a Mockingbird, and there was a tremendous interest by the media in this, and all of a sudden the program took off, and people from all different walks of life, all different age groups, got engaged with One Book, One Chicago, because many people said, gee, you know, I never read the book, but I saw the movie, I want to read the book, or I read the book years ago, I want to reread it, or I've never read the book, know nothing about it, and I want to read it. But in addition to reading it and discussing it in libraries and bookstores and universities and church basements, small groups were putting on the play, and a group of lawyers put on the trial scene from the play in the ceremonial courtroom over in the federal courthouse here. I mean, it just became this program that grew so well and so popularly that the mayor called me right in the middle of what I call Mockingbird mania. I mean, we had interviews from the New York Times and the British Broadcasting Corporation and people calling us from all over the world saying, tell us more about this program. And the mayor called and said, this is such an important thing. We have to do this again. And I said, okay, we're going to do it again next fall. We had done this in the fall of 2001. He said, no, let's do it twice a year. So we do it twice a year. We're the only city that does this program twice a year. We do it spring and fall, and there are now 150 cities around the world that do some form of a one-book program. And the name is ours. One Book, One Chicago was a name that we just kind of came up with here at the Chicago Public Library. And what is really cute is that that is the generic name for it now in these cities around the world. They call it One Book. Everyone calls it a one-book program, whether they've given it a different title or not.
Wow, that's terrific.
Yeah, we're very proud of it.
Yeah. Also want to discuss U-Media
Yes.
for young people right here at the Harold Washington Public Library.
U-Media is a concept that was brought to us by the MacArthur Foundation. And what they looked at was some research that was done by Dr. Mimi Ito, who's in California, around how teenagers learn. And they learn through a variety of media. They learn through technology, they learn through print, they learn through mentors. And so having done this research, MacArthur came to the Chicago Public Library and said, we have an idea around putting a digital learning space in the Harold Washington Library Center and making it accessible to teenagers. And we really loved the idea because we had been wanting to do something special for teens. We have a teen volume program, which is fiction and nonfiction collections. It's a reader's theater. It's a variety of poetry slams and other work with designing websites for our teenagers. But we wanted more. We wanted a way to really get them engaged in a meaningful and creative way. And so this was a perfect opportunity. MacArthur said to us, we'd like to help have the space designed to work very easily with mentors and librarians around learning how to use digital technology in a new way. And we asked if we could incorporate our book collections in the space as well, which they hadn't thought of, and they loved it, they embraced it. So now what we have every day, after school and into the evenings, 7 days a week, is U-Media, which is for teenagers only, no little brothers and sisters, and no parents. The teens come in every day, or they connect with us through their own social network. And what they're doing is working collaboratively on projects. They're becoming civically engaged, and they're learning by making and doing. They're not passive, they're not playing games. And if they are on games, they're on games like Little Big Planet that engage their creativity and make them think in a larger vision about who they are, where they live, and their place in the world. We've had them read and work on One Book, One Chicago programs, and then create whole beautiful poetry, spoken word, video, murals around the books that they've read. We had them read, one of the books was about the Burnham Plan. After they read the book, Carl Smith's book about the Burnham Plan, they went out with digital cameras to their neighborhoods and reimagined and replanned their own neighborhoods, created all kinds of beautiful media around that, and several of those pieces were featured at UN World Habitat Day in Washington, D.C. and Rio de Janeiro. So these teens now see the library as a place where they get actively engaged in learning and collaborating. And what's great about it is that, do you remember when you were in high school and you never really knew kids from the other high school? And if you were a senior, you certainly never spoke to a freshman? None of those walls exist in U Media. You'll see groups of kids from 4 different high schools, all different age groups, all working together around one project. And it's really, really beautiful. It's what the public library of the 21st century is all about, and it's what 21st century learning is going to look like.
What's next? What are the new initiatives?
Well, we continue to look at how new forms of technology can be adapted to our information needs. You know, as the iPad comes out, what is that going to mean for us and our reference librarians as they are working with the public? How does that help us with the collections we've already digitized and put up online? We already provide free downloads of books, music, and movies through our website. We can also provide access to the Sony e-reader books, if you're a Sony e-reader fan, through our website, all free of charge. What's the next huge iteration of technology? When will Kindle and when will the iPad want to play with libraries and work with libraries? We're all very willing to work with them, but they have to understand our model, which is we don't sell things to people. We pay a subscription fee so that you can borrow it and return it. And we are just constantly looking and amazed by and enjoying what technology has done to help us bring more information to people. We will continue to build buildings because neighborhood library buildings in a city like Chicago serve not only as a place of lifelong learning, but that community center that the mayor envisioned. They're a gathering spot. They're a place where people come in hot weather and cold to be warmed and cooled, but more importantly, they're a place where people feel welcomed within their own neighborhood, and they can become engaged in a financial literacy program, they can be part of an author event, they can attend a CAPS meeting, and they can just feel extremely engaged. Robert Putnam has done a lot of research around the Chicago Public Library and other places that are that great third place between home and work or school, where one can gather with people of diverse backgrounds and cultures. And what he has said is the public library is that place.
Mary, I always ask a question about, what has been the most satisfying part of your personal or professional life. You're doing a wonderful job telling me already, but for you to be involved in something that's truly life-changing, community-changing, ultimately world-changing, what's it like for you personally?
It's the most wonderful experience I've ever had. I absolutely love what I do. I love my job. It's not a job. It's just pure, sheer enjoyment. And I wouldn't do it if I didn't love it. But every single day, I am reminded of why the public library is important to the people of Chicago and the people of the surrounding communities. I'm reminded that this is the place. Yesterday I took some people on a tour, and our cyber navigator just rattled off that 20 people she helped found jobs. That's incredibly satisfying to know that because we were there in that neighborhood, someone had access to a computer and they found a job in this recession. And then the other day someone sent me a little blurb that they had read on Facebook. Overheard walking out of the John Merlot branch, which is on Belmont, a little girl looking up at her father, and she had just received her first library card. In a very serious tone, she turned to her father and said, "This is a very important day for me." That makes it all worthwhile.
That's perfect. I think we're finished, but while I have you here, you mentioned Jean Simon a little earlier.
Yes.
Did you know her very well?
I did know Jean.
Could
Yeah.
I ask you a little bit about
Sure,
her while we're still
sure,
rolling here?
sure.
Of course, Jean made her mark in so many ways, from one of the first women attorneys in the Cook County Prosecutor's
Right.
Office to legislator, wonderful politician in her own right. But she took up libraries as her cause célèbre. This was something so important to her.
Right.
Talk about her accomplishments there.
She really elevated libraries in Illinois and nationally to an important resource. She understood that role that we play in lifelong learning, and because she was such an elegant, graceful, thoughtful, and accomplished person, people listened to her. And she's the one who helped create the first White House Conference on Libraries. And it was really because of Jean that libraries really rose to an enormous prominence in the state of Illinois and allowed us to hold our heads up high and say, yes, we are the state that really champions libraries and the role they play in people's lives. But you know, Jean was a little older than I, so she was of that generation, not quite the whole generation ahead of me, but maybe half a generation. And growing up, you know, you looked for female role models, and she was definitely one, because she was educated, she was smart, she was savvy, she was funny, she was a wife and a mother, but she was strong and a legislator, and she had the whole package, and she had a great partner in her husband Paul.
Yeah, they were something else.
Yeah, they were a power
we
couple.
Loved them. We loved them. They were our friends, our neighbors, our people in Congress and the
Yeah.
Senate and everything.
Yeah.
And yet you walk down the street and there they were at the little Cristado's bakery or something.
Yes.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, you know, the thing I loved about Jean was she had the best smile. She had the greatest smile, that was genuine, that made you feel so welcome, and that any idea you had was brilliant, you know, and she was willing to listen.
Yeah. Mary, thank you for all of this.